Senior Observer Kethral pressed his four-fingered hand against the cold viewport of Station Gamma 7. Below him, the planet Zarian 4 churned with sulfuric storms and rivers of molten rock. 3 standard cycles ago, the Galactic Council had marked this world with a permanent red designation: uninhabitable, dangerous, forbidden. The classification had stood for over 2,000 years without challenge. Then the humans arrived. Kethral turned away from the viewport and walked toward the central monitoring chamber, where his team of 12 observers sat at their stations. Each one tracked a different aspect of the impossible scene unfolding on the surface below. Junior Observer Melik looked up from her screen with an expression that Kethral had learned to recognize over his many years of service. It was the look of someone whose entire understanding of the universe had just cracked down the middle. The first human ships had entered the Zarian system 8 cycles ago. Kethral remembered watching them approach, expecting them to scan the planet and move on like every other species before them. The Vorten had come once, stayed for 3 days, and declared the world impossible. The crystalline Sheth had lasted 2 days before their biological matrices began to destabilize from the radiation. Even the mighty Karath Empire, with all their advanced technology, had abandoned their colonization attempt after losing 6 ships to the atmospheric conditions. But humans did not leave. They stayed. They studied. And then they did something that no species had ever attempted before. They began to build. Kethral walked to Melik's station and looked over her shoulder at the thermal imaging data. On the screen, a massive structure was taking shape in the northern volcanic region. The humans called it a terraforming hub. Kethral called it insanity given physical form. The building sat directly on top of an active lava flow, anchored by supports that somehow remained stable despite the constant ground movement beneath them. The temperature at the construction site reached 400 degrees this morning, Melik reported without looking up. 3 human workers were caught outside their protective suits when a sudden eruption occurred. Nearby, Kethral felt his secondary heart skip. Such an event would have killed any other species instantly. Casualties? None. Melik's voice carried that same confused tone that all the observers had developed over the past few cycles. They suffered what they call second-degree burns. One required medical attention for smoke inhalation. All 3 returned to work within 6 hours. This was the pattern that Kethral had observed since the humans began their project. Events that should have been fatal were merely inconvenient. Conditions that should have forced evacuation were treated as minor obstacles. The humans did not seem to understand that they were supposed to die. He moved to the next station, where Observer Trell monitored the atmospheric processors. The massive machines hummed with activity, drawing in the toxic gases that made up Zarian 4's atmosphere and converting them into something breathable. The technology itself was not unique. Many species had developed similar devices. What made the human approach different was the scale of their ambition and the locations they chose to place their equipment. They installed a new processor in the Acid Valley yesterday, Trell reported. The corrosive atmosphere dissolved the protective coating within hours. Instead of relocating the equipment, they developed a new coating compound overnight and applied it while the processor was still operational. Kethral stared at the data scrolling across Trell's screen. The humans had not stopped their work to solve the problem. They had continued building while simultaneously inventing new technology to address challenges that would have ended any other colonization effort. It was as if failure was simply not a concept that existed in their minds. The central display in the monitoring chamber showed a real-time view of the primary human settlement. In just 8 cycles, they had constructed living quarters for over 3,000 colonists. They had built greenhouses that somehow grew earth plants in soil that was 80% volcanic ash. They had established water processing facilities that extracted moisture from an atmosphere that was technically too dry to support liquid water. Everything about their presence on Zarian 4 violated what the Galactic Council considered possible. Cathrall remembered his training at the Observer Academy. He had studied the classification system for planetary habitation. Class 1 worlds were paradises, ready for immediate settlement. Class 2 required minimal adaptation. Class 3 needed significant infrastructure, but remained viable. The scale continued down to increasingly difficult designations until it reached Class 9, which indicated planets that could never support life under any circumstances. Zarian 4 was a Class 10. The Council had created the designation specifically for this world. After the first survey teams returned with their reports, Class 10 meant absolute impossibility. It meant that the very laws of physics made habitation unachievable. It meant that no species, no matter how advanced or determined, could ever establish a permanent presence. The humans had not received this message. Or perhaps they had received it and simply chosen to ignore it. Observer Palax called out from his station near the back of the chamber. "Senior Observer, the human commander is requesting a communication link. She wishes to invite you to the surface for a tour of their facilities." Cathrall felt his scales tighten involuntarily. The surface, where the air was poison and the ground was fire, where every moment brought new dangers that would kill him in seconds. The humans lived there by choice. They raised their children there. They had built schools and hospitals and recreational centers in a place that existed only to destroy life. "Tell her I respectfully decline," Cathrall replied, "but express my appreciation for the offer." He moved to the historical database terminal and pulled up the records from the beginning of the human colonization program. The files contained thousands of incidents that should have ended the project. Equipment failures in critical systems, unexpected geological events, supply shortages that left the colonists without essential resources for weeks at a time. Each entry told the same story. A problem occurred. The humans adapted. They survived. They continued. One entry caught his attention. During the third cycle, a massive earthquake had destroyed the main power generation facility. The colony had been without electricity for 12 days, while temperatures on the surface dropped to lethal levels at night and rose to equally lethal levels during the day. The official response from the human leadership had been 4 words long. It read simply, "We will manage somehow." And they had. Using portable generators salvaged from damaged equipment, battery packs stripped from vehicles that could no longer move, and an improvised solar collection system built from reflective materials meant for entirely different purposes. The humans had maintained just enough power to keep their people alive. When the replacement facility came online on day 13, not a single colonist had died. Cathrall closed the database and looked around at his team. They were all experienced observers who had monitored dozens of colonization efforts across the galaxy. They had watched successful settlements grow into thriving civilizations. They had documented the tragic ends of projects that pushed too far beyond reasonable limits. None of them had ever seen anything like the humans on Zarian 4. The communication system chimed, and the voice of the human commander filled the chamber. "Observation Station Gamma 7. This is Colony Director Sarah Chen. We wanted to inform you that we have successfully established our first permanent agricultural zone in the eastern volcanic plains. Initial crop yields are exceeding projected targets by 40%. We estimate full food self-sufficiency within 2 cycles." Cathrall exchanged glances with Melik. Food self-sufficiency, on a world where nothing should grow, in soil that was technically more mineral toxin than organic material. The humans had done it in less than 10 cycles, while every model predicted it would take at least 50 years under ideal conditions. "Director Chan," Cathrall responded carefully, "may I ask how you achieve such rapid agricultural development?" There was a brief pause before the human answered. Her voice carried a tone that Cathrall had come to recognize as distinctly human. It was the sound of someone who genuinely did not understand why their accomplishment was considered remarkable. We modified some techniques from Earth's history. Our ancestors farmed in deserts, on mountain slopes, in frozen tundra, and in swamps. Compared to those challenges, Zarian 4 is actually quite manageable once you understand its patterns. The volcanic soil is incredibly nutrient-rich. We just needed to filter out the harmful elements and add some Earth-specific compounds. Our biologists worked out the process in about 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Problems that would have occupied the best scientific minds of the Galactic Council for decades had been solved by human biologists in 3 weeks. Kethril felt the familiar sensation of his worldview shifting once again. Thank you for the update, Director. We will include this information in our report to the Council. Of course. And the invitation to visit remains open whenever you are ready. We have developed some excellent protective equipment that would allow your species to survive on the surface. Several of our colonists actually enjoy the challenge of designing gear for different physiologies. They find it fun. The humans found survival engineering entertaining. Kethril thanked the director again and closed the communication link. He walked back to the viewport and stared down at Zarian 4. The planet looked exactly as it had 3 cycles ago. Hostile, deadly, completely inappropriate for any form of settlement. Yet spread across its surface like tiny seeds of defiance, human structures glowed with life and activity. Children played in pressurized recreation domes while their parents worked to tame a world that had resisted all previous attempts at conquest. The report Kethril would send to the Galactic Council would require a new section. The classification system itself would need revision. Class 10 could no longer mean impossible. It would have to mean impossible for non-human species only, because the evidence before his eyes made one truth absolutely clear. Humans did not accept the word impossible. They treated it as a challenge to overcome rather than a boundary to respect. Observer Melik appeared beside him at the viewport. Senior Observer, do you think they will succeed? True permanent colonization? Kethril watched as another human transport ship descended through the toxic clouds toward the landing zone. More colonists. More dreamers who refused to acknowledge that they were attempting the unachievable. More of that strange species that seemed to believe the universe would bend to their will if they simply pushed hard enough. I no longer know what success means when applied to humans, Kethril admitted. But I have learned something over these past cycles. Never tell a human that something cannot be done. They will take it as a personal insult and prove you wrong simply to make a point. Below them, the impossible colony continued to grow.